Could you tell us more about how this 1959 was such a big shift for Malaysian drama in English?
Right. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Aisha. So here we go through, all right, before that, this is Lloyd Fernando. The middle is Lee Ju For. And here we have Syed Alwi, Syed Hassan. Okay, now, right, the turning point in Malaysian drama in English. Actually, there are a few turning points. So the first major turning point would be the first major turning point for Malaysian drama in English after independence would be 13 May 1969, the riot, because as as we all know, it resulted in the legislation that eventually reduced the significance of the English language in Malaysia. That's according to Margaret Young. Yes, it resulted in legislation because of the introduction of several policies that affected English language writing in Malaysia. Examples are the National Culture Policy of 1971, which I will cover in this in today's lecture. And then there's also the new economic policy, which well in which indirectly affected the affected MDE because a lot of writers would take up would pick national with the sorry a lot of writers would pick new economic policy and make it as an kind of an issue in their place. You know, they would make it into a content that refers to new economic policy. I think Huzir Sulaiman's plays would also very subtly include new economic policy, you know, issues about the new economic policy. And then there's also the reinforcement of the National Education Act and the National Language Bill, which reinforces the use of Bahasa Malaysia and pushes the English language to the sideline. All right. So I will continue with the National Culture Policy. Now, the National Culture Policy of 1971 states three things. One is that the national culture must be based on the indigenous culture of this region. Now, by indigenous culture, this means the Malay Bumiputra culture, right? Number two is that the suitable elements from other cultures may be accepted as part of the national culture. Number three, Islam is an important component in the formulation of the national culture. Now, these three things, these three statements stated in the National Culture Policy impacted Malaysian drama in English in several ways, right? Okay, number one is the polarization of Malaysian society along racial lines that became more prominent, more so in terms of the Bumiputra versus non-Bumiputra discourse, as in the policy has separated Malaysian society into two parts, the Bumiputras and the non-Bumiputras, because of this stems from the national economic policy. So this was a big debate back then in the 1970s, 1980s, all right, because everything was seen along racial lines. And then because of this, it also affected the status of English language, not just English language, it also affected other ethnic mother tongues. So now other ethnic mother tongues were also made subservient to Bahasa Malaysia. So right now, because of the national language policy, Bahasa Malaysia has to go into the forefront. Hence, all cultural activities other than those that promote Malay language and culture receive minimal or no support. Now, this one affected MDE, especially MDE, because you see, Malaysian drama in English, when you talk about drama, it is very closely related to theatre practices. That means performing arts, performances, and by performances I would mean you need to rent a venue, you need to sell tickets, you need to get sponsorship, you need to pay actors, you need to pay people to come and set up the stage and all that. You need money, right? So because of that, if you happen to be performing an English language play, then you will be receiving very minimal or no support, because at the time when the policy changes, a lot of the allocation and the money given by the government would go to works produced in the Malay language and anything that goes in line with the national culture policy. All right. So that means writers of the English language would by then be marginalized to a certain extent. Okay. So only writings, number three, only writings in Bahasa Malaysia are considered as national literature, while those in English, Mandarin, Tamil, and other minority languages are recognized as sectional literature, or you call that sastra sukuan. So your sastra kebangsaan must be in Malay language. Sastra sukuan, any languages other than Malay. So again, support, money allocation, financial support, any kind of support would go to anything to do with the Malay language first, right? And then number four, the art forms of other minority cultures, including Malay arts that were deemed un-Islamic, such as Mak Yong, Main Puteri, and Wayang Kulit, had to rely on private and individual support, hence did not flourish as much as those that obtained government support. So because of this, the traditional arts, the Malay traditional arts such as Mak Yong, Main Puteri, and Wayang Kulit have also been sidelined, although they were performed in the Malay language, right? Because these three especially, right, are considered as un-Islamic, so they do not get they do not get government support at all. It was deemed un-Islamic, therefore, sidelined, and they couldn't flourish under the national culture policy. All right. So because of this, okay, let's look at how it has affected the writers of MDE, the playwrights. So of course, because of the policies, number one, fewer Malaysian plays of English language were produced and performed because there was no support. Number two, there was no money, right? Nonina Zura calls this period a time of alienation for the English language playwright. Yes, it was alienation because if you happen to be a playwright, an English language playwright during this time, and let's say you make your money from writing English plays, you just couldn't. It was very, very difficult to survive. Very, very difficult. So therefore, the term alienation. Right? And Christian Jit calls this period, writing plays in English does not accrue awards and grants, financial and otherwise, from official and public benefactors. Yeah, you will not get any grants, you won't get awards. Awards for, like Sastrawan Negara must be, you must be writing in Malay in order to qualify for the award of Sastrawan Negara. Okay. And then, yes, you won't get support from any official or public benefactors. And because of this, you see Lee Jufor migrated, okay? He migrated to Australia. Then you see Said Alwi, he stopped writing in English language and shifted to writing in Malay before coming back to English after probably 2 decades later, right? And then Christian Jit too, right? Christian Jit has never been a playwright. He has never produced plays, but he has been very actively directing plays. He's a theater practitioner in the sense that he writes critical essays about plays, critical articles, and his articles were published in the New Straits Times. Okay, and he took on a pseudonym called Utih, U-T-I-H, and he wrote a column in New Straits Times, right? So, yes, and because of 1969, he also shifted to directing, Malay plays instead of English plays, directing and producing more Malay plays. He was also, I think, Not just that, he was also actively involved in collaborating with Malay playwrights. All right, collaborating with Malay playwrights, directing their plays. Okay, so on and so forth. And Edward Dorrell, Patrick Yeo, Kedas, they have stopped writing altogether. Edward Dorrell went into education. I think Patrick Yeo as well. Kedas went into journalism. Okay, Lloyd Fernando did not write plays until much later. He left for the UK to pursue a law degree. So this was what has happened to Malaysian playwrights in English after 1967. I think the same thing also happened to novelists and to poets and novelists of the same time. If I'm not mistaken, I think Dr. Aisha, you can uh, 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 explain a bit. I think Shirley
Yeah,
Lim
Shirley Lim
also
also
migrated.
to the US.
Right. What
And
about poets? Other poets?
Shirley Lim, Yi Tiang Hong.
Oh,
Yeah, well, these are among the two poets, the two Malaysian poets who chose to migrate overseas after
right,
the sidelining of the English language. Yeah,
right.
right.
I see.
Lloyd
Right.
Fernando, he did eventually write a novel in English that was published much later in 1976.
I see. I
Yeah,
see. That's is it green is the color or is it scorpion orchid?
Scorpion
I
Orchid.
try
Yeah.
scorpion
Yeah.
orchid. Yes. Oh,
Mhm.
for your information, scorpion orchid started off as a novel, but it has also been turned into a play later, much later. Right. Okay.
Okay,
And
so right, definitely a very difficult period for Malaysian drama in English, right? But
true, true.
it seems that there are still a few playwrights who continue to produce plays in English despite the national cultural policy, and then the shift to Bahasa in schools and eventually universities. So, what about these playwrights in the 1970s?
Right. Okay. The playwrights in the 1970s, I would say, right. Okay. Now we are talking about the playwrights in the 1970s, and we have classified them into the second generation because the first generation would be those who started writing before independence. Um, and the second generation are the people who started writing and producing plays in the 1970s onward. And there are not many of them. There are just three that I know of. The first one is Professor Gulam Sarwa Yusuf, who came up with Halfway Road Penang, The Trial of Hang Tuah the Great in 2014, and Suvarna Padma, The Golden Lotus in 2015. Now, the years that I've mentioned here, they are the years of publication. Okay, and Chin San Sui wrote Lady White in 1977. The play Lady White has never been published. Refugee Images in 1980. He wrote that in 1980, but was only published in 2015. Then Yap Aloy, the play in 1985. It was staged in 1985. The play was also never published. Reunion was staged earlier, but it was published in 1994. And KL Central was staged in 1999, and the play was never published. So you see, Gulam Sarwa Yusuf and Chin San Sui, okay, this is interesting. They were classmates. They were together classmates in University Malaya. And also, Christian Jit. Christian Jit was also in University Malaya, but not in the English department. Gulam Sarwa Yusuf and Chin San Sui were classmates together in the Department of English Language and Literature in University Malaya. Christian Jit was in the History department. Okay, then we have K.S. Maniam. Now I included K.S. Maniam here because he started writing as a poet. All right, but he wrote his first play in 1983. His second, The Sandpit Women's, in 1988. So he started off as a poet first before becoming a playwright, right? So now the themes. Now you can see that in the earlier generation, the first generation, most of them would be writing about mm, what concerns them. All right, they would be writing about their surroundings, what's immediate to them. All right. And you don't see many of them touch on politics. You see more politics and a little bit more issues that concern the world, starting from the second generation, right? In the second generation, you see that the plays would touch on racial and class conflicts, like in Halfway Road Penang. It's about racial conflict. Also, refugee images is about class conflict. Now, injustice, social disintegration or social integration, right? Identity, nationalism, generation gap, and gender. So you see that the second generation is now more adventurous in venturing out and touching on themes that are a bit more sensitive compared to the first generation when they talk about poverty, when they talk about education, and they talk about realistic life in their immediate circle. Now the second generation have started venturing out further, right? This is because they have seen May 1969, all right? And this generation, they're a bit more outspoken, all right? So they want to make their voices heard more. Okay, here, let me introduce you. This is Chin San Sui on the left, and the next one is Professor Gulan Sawa Yusuf, and below here, this is K.S. Maniam. All right. So now, what is most noticeable during this period, yeah, in the 1970s? Now, according to Margaret Yong and Kathy Rowland, now the colonial variety of theatrical activity has become peripheral to the contemporary idea of a Malaysian drama in English. Now, that means they are no longer sticking to the colonial variety. They are no longer into Shakespeare, no longer into Bernard Shaw, all right? And all these all these theater activities that were passed down from the colonizers are now being adapted. So giving rise to a new form of Malaysianized English language drama. So you see that in the 1970s, writers have writers like Chin San Sui and Gulam Sawar have started including Malaysian dialects into their plays. All right, a little bit, well, not so much, but a little bit slowly. All right, introducing all these plays. Actually, it has already started since Edward Dorrell's time and Patrick Yeo's time, but the 1970s, you see it being reinforced even more. So Malaysianized English language drama and other innovative techniques based on ritual and traditional theatre, incorporating elements of wayang kulit and Chinese opera into modern pieces. Now, I give you an example. Like for Chin San Sui, he has a group called Kelana Phoenix. Now, Kelana Phoenix is a group of wayang kulit players who would go from one place to another, playing wayang kulit in shopping complexes because they want to introduce what wayang kulit is. All right, it was established in 1976, consisting of several wayang kulit players from Kampung Pasir Lama in Kelantan. All right, so they would go from one place to another, and they would incorporate modern and traditional plays. All right, they would adapt and incorporate the plays, and they would show it to the audience. And these are usually audience in big cities who would not probably have had a chance, face-to-face chance to see wayang kulit. So they would bring their wayang kulit to the city and introduce it to the people. However, because of money, right, they couldn't survive that long. So they had to close down. So that's what happens in the 1970s. A lot of incorporation of local dialects, a lot of incorporation of uh, Malay words into the English word, so to make it more Malaysianized, and then also incorporation of ritual and traditional theatre, examples like wayang kulit and Chinese opera, into the English language plays to give the play a Malaysian identity. Because the 1970s, you see, the writers are more bold now. They are a little bit more experimental. And this is also a time that writers search for what is a national identity, what makes us different from the British expatriate writers. We want to be different, all right? We don't want to copycat them anymore. We want our plays to be more original. But what kind of inspiration should we incorporate? What kind of inspiration should we bring in? So it's a constant conversation, it's a constant debate what to bring in. So in the end, let's Malaysianize the English language drama. So first of all, the language. So you bring in Malay words, Malay grammar, Malay syntax, and incorporate it into the English syntax. Now that was the second generation.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of information about Malaysian drama in English, and a lot of interesting things that we've covered in this part. So this is the end of part one of this presentation by Miss May, but we'll have another one where she will talk about the development of Malaysian drama in English in the 1980s. Yeah, there's still a bit more that area to cover, and this will be the next installment of the video. So thank you again, May.
Yes, you're welcome, and thank you so much for having me over.
All right, so till the next part. So thank you very much.